I'm going to start this discussion off by summarizing the two TED Talks videos that we watched in class this week. And then I'm going to discuss the main takeaways from each video. And then I'm going to finish with talking about conflict and my views on conflict before this class and my views on conflict after everything we've read and viewed so far. So I'm going to begin with the first video, Tom Wojak's TED Talks. I hope I'm saying his last name right. What he does, he does this marshmallow building project in which he puts people in groups and they work together in a group to construct this thing out of spaghetti noodles in which a giant marshmallow is placed on top of the spaghetti noodles and hopefully it doesn't fall apart. The groups range from recent business school graduates to executives to CEOs, and then there's a group of kindergartners in there. And surprisingly, the kindergartners have more success with their spaghetti constructs than the adults do. The reason for this, Tom thinks, is one, the kindergartners don't have an outstanding personality in the group that wants to be the leader of everything, be in charge of everything, whereas that's a personality dynamic that exists in every adult group. And then one thing they do differently that separates them from everyone else is the kindergartner's prototype. So instead of going into this having one developed plan for success, they start with their marshmallow and they build off of that. And then if they insert a noodle wrong and it doesn't work, they quickly swap it out for something else. The adults in the group, they stick with their plan. And then when something doesn't go according to plan, they have an uh-oh moment, as Tom calls it. Whereas when they prototype in the kindergarten group, if something doesn't work, it's not really an uh-oh moment, it's a ta-da moment because they're able to swap in a different piece, move it around, and voila, it's fixed. So he hits on that, and then he hits on how it's important to have a combination of a specialized skill set and then facilitation skills as well when you're working with groups. And then the main takeaway from this is look for all of the hidden assumptions when you go into every group project. Finding hidden assumptions helps you find a shared experience with the group. It creates a common group language, teaches you how to prototype, and all of these build on the group's cohesion. The next video, Heffernan, she explains the story of the scientist named Alice. And Alice faces many obstacles because she was working in a field that's male-dominated, so she just had a lot of critics. Basically, Alice was really interested in epidemiology. Alice, more specifically, she's interested in cancer in childhood, early childhood. And she has this research project which isn't very well funded because of all of the obstacles she faces. Basically, she's looking for what's causing all these young children to die so early with cancer. And she finds out that it's because their mothers, when they were pregnant, had x-rays. The overwhelming evidence of this is made public and people stop x-raying pregnant women, which kind of puts her research to a halt because there's no more women, getting x-rays while they're pregnant, and there's no more children to see, kind of test that theory. So she partners up, she gets this research partner named George, and George's main job is basically to go against everything she says and to prove Alice wrong. And I personally would find this very frustrating. I don't know how far I would have gotten if I had a science partner who was just trying to be in my face about me being wrong. But Alice, this really helped improve her as a scientist and more importantly as a thinker. Heffernan explains that this conflict is necessary, and George knew that, because by overly proving how wrong she was, Alice had to work harder and think more and go above and beyond and have this extra confidence to know exactly when she was right, that she wouldn't have had otherwise if George would just echo her theories and agree with everything that she said. So him constantly creating this conflict really made her a better scientist overall. And then Heffernan goes on to apply this specific example to conflict in the organizational world. Heffernan expresses that organizations are unable to drop their fear of conflict and work with other organizations. They won't acknowledge the conflict. So instead of working on it, they just remain silent about it, and silence is more dangerous than the conflict itself. Some of the biggest catastrophes come from information that's been made public, and people went out of their way to ignore this information that was made public rather than actually confronting it and working on the conflict. The main takeaway from her video is basically to be open to conflict, because conflict forces people to think and change. Change is the biggest part of that, as people don't like change. Conflict forces you to work with people who are different, who you otherwise wouldn't work with. In a sense, it makes you walk a mile in their shoes, just to get that perception that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Avoiding conflict leads to silence, and silence becomes very, very dangerous. Moving on to how I view conflict before this class and to how I view it now. Prior to this class, conflict is something I avoided, which kind of ashamed to admit after reading about it now, but I did avoid it as much as I could. If I felt like there was going to be potential conflict, whether it was, at work or in a school project, I did everything I could to, amend the original plan in order to avoid this conflict. Whenever conflict did happen, I would just look for the easiest possible solution to nip it in the bud, which really wasn't ending the conflict, because there's always going to be that conflict if it never got properly, dealt with by the people who had the conflict. Overall, you can never avoid conflict. That's like my biggest takeaway from this class. If anything, you need to welcome this conflict, because conflict is so vital when it comes to working with groups. Just like Tom Wojcik said in his TED Talks, you need to have these aha moments instead of these uh-oh moments. Uh-oh moments are roadblocks, and by, ignoring the conflict, you're not fixing the uh-oh in the whole issue with the group. Conflicts and people thinking and considering theories and experiences they otherwise wouldn't have, they help groups build their cohesion and teaches us how to prototype. Without conflict, we wouldn't be able to do any of these things. Instead of having a black and white view of what is wrong and only arming yourself with a single action plan, conflict, acknowledging it, gives you different outlets instead of just having one backup plan. It helps you readjust. And readjusting to the conflict is so important, because if you stay silent and you brush it under the rug and you don't make adjustments, you're just going to end up with more problems.